Hello and welcome. This video is the obstacle riding general theory. This is video 1 in an ongoing series. My name is Neil Price. This is the Trials and Enduro Skills channel. Tonight, this session, we've got a fair bit to cover. We are going to set a really good foundation for your obstacle riding. We are going to talk about the 3 core lift mechanisms that you can use, and then the 3 corresponding riding techniques that go with it. We're going to cover the underlying pattern of RSG, which makes learning the process so much more simple because your brain just loves patterns. And then we're going to talk about how these 3 can explain all obstacle riding for you. So tonight, my aim, or this session, my aim, you could be watching it another time, maybe not live, my aim is to help you find clarity. And when you have clarity about how these things work, then you can actually make adjustments in your riding and make progression. One of the things I find is that around obstacle riding, you will hear jargon from every which way, from your friends in the club to your mates you ride with to different people online and different coaches. When you have this clarity, when you have this understanding of how it all actually works, you'll then be able to talk and engage with anyone else and learn off any other coach, not just me. You'll be able to find anyone around. So to give you a little backstory, for me, I'm a trials rider. I'm Australian number 3 at the moment. I'm 45 years old and I'm still kicking along all right. And when I first went to Europe, I really struggled with, and when I was a developing trials rider, I really struggled to get someone to explain how all this stuff works. And I've spent the last decades working this all out and coming up with a process and a system so you can understand how it all works. So before we kick off, the most important thing that we need to cover is, or get out of the way at the beginning, is the difference between outcome and technique. Much of what you're going to see online and much of the jargon that you're going to hear is when riders are focused on outcome as opposed to technique. Now, when we're out riding and whatnot, you come across a log or a rock, you're going to do whatever you can do to try and get over that. And in the process, if you haven't learnt the mechanics of it, well, then you can't really alter and change things. You'll just be focused on trying to go over the obstacle and get past it. Now, the difference when we talk about technique is not worried about the outcome. When we are training, there's these 2 portions. We will train on the technique side to make sure that you fully understand the mechanics, and you actually train in a way where you're not worried about the outcome. You're not actually worried about getting over the obstacle. You're just worried about putting the best methodology and technique in place. When you then go to a competition, in competition, you don't have an opportunity there, or when you're out riding with your mates, it doesn't have to be competition. You don't have the opportunity there to learn a new skill. It's too late. You had to learn that in your training. When you're at a competition, you are just taking whatever skills you have to achieve an outcome. So a lot of the jargon that you'll hear is people essentially developing a workaround to make things happen. Now, beyond this video, we're going to go in, because it's a series, we're going to get much deeper into everything. And you don't need to go as deep as what other people will, but as you do, you'll realize that when you are training for this stuff, there is these 2 forms of training, outcome and technique. I have a ultra simple training program that I use, or process, which is essentially 1/4 of your training should be purely technique focused, 50% should be outcome focused or competition simulation, and then the last 1/4 should just be fun, so you can keep the engagement and keeping things going. So, awesome. So first of all, I want to just demo the 3 techniques that can be used. And they are ride, punch, and splat. And they all have a corresponding lift mechanism that's behind them. So, bear with me one moment while I get my bike. Is there any comments there, Jason? No? So if you are watching tonight, I will be doing demos, of course. And if you do have any questions, jump in and chime in. I have some guys behind the computer watching your comments, so they'll jump in when it's ready. So the first technique is ride technique. And this is when we are using geometry to create lift. Now, that there was actually the same as this. And it's also the same as this. Now, I've delivered that in a range of different ways and variables based on the obstacle, but the lift mechanism is the same, and that's the key point, or the critical point, that we want to get across. The next one is punch technique. Some people call this zap, where we are placing the front, and it's really lift via stop or containment. Now, this rock you can see here is undercut, so my tyre goes underneath, so it can't ride the face. It can be done rolling like that, or it can be done stationary. Whoop, if I could balance. Or it could be done on different surfaces like this. Again, the key point to it is not what the wheels are doing, it's how the lift is generated, and that's the point that matters. The last one, of course, is splat technique, so which many people already generally know, but the lift here is via leverage. And that is the same as this. And of course, all of these can also be done on the Enduro bike. The technique doesn't change as such, the lift mechanism doesn't change. There is some variation with the bike. Whoop, it's slippery. But the actual lift mechanism is exactly the same. The funny thing is, it's actually ultra slippery here, because when we were setting up, we spilt some oil, so now I've got a bit of oil over everything, but that adds to the entertainment, doesn't it? Adds a bit of fun to the process. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Really change your thinking here, or put the jargon that you've been taught over the years out of your mind here for this tonight. I'm going to have to go back to the gym. I'm a bit out of breath out of that. Talking and riding, it always takes the breath out of you. And I always, within my demonstrations, I always make some sort of stuff up. So tonight should be fairly entertaining, particularly with a bit of oil on them. Now, I want to take a step back now, and I want to establish what is it that we're actually trying to do when we're riding an obstacle. And this change in your thinking can make a massive difference. I had to go through this when I went to Europe. I rocked up there, and these guys were riding these massive rocks and obstacles that I would never have dreamt of in Australia, and they would just continue climbing up and up and up. And I really had to change how I thought about obstacles. And that is, we're not trying to go over obstacles, we're trying to ride up the face of them. Now, anytime that we come to an obstacle, so take this concrete block here, when we approach this obstacle, we're trying to create lift here on the ground, and then once we've created the lift, we are trying to find traction on the face. So it is lift plus the climb allows you to go up. Now you might say to me, oh, but Neil, I'm only riding small logs like this. I can just lift the front wheel and I can just bang over it, which you can. And like I said before, that is outcome. That'll get you over it. But how often do you see a rider stuck on a small log like that? And then there's a hole dug in front of it or whatnot. In those situations, if you know how to generate the lift, you can work with the situation, and then you want to actually ride up the face. But even when I ride something like this in third gear on the Enduro bike at speed, we are still generating lift on the ground, and then we will actually want to use some of the traction on the obstacle. The climb is a little flatter, the trajectory is flatter, but we're still creating lift on the ground, and we'll still use traction on the obstacle. So no matter what you're doing with an obstacle, it's always lift plus climb. Now, when we're going to create lift, so when I approach this, there's two forces. There's the force that you're approaching with that is pushing you forward, and then there's a force which pushes you up. And the balance of those two forces is the trajectory at which you will lift. So if you go back to your school days, balancing vectors, there's a vector pushing this way, there's a vector pushing that way, and then they balance out to create a force in that direction. And what your job as a rider is to do is to manipulate the lift so your trajectory matches the obstacle. That's a really important point because there is traction on the obstacle and you can use that traction. Not always, sometimes it's slippery like tonight, but that's another matter. Then we have to rely more on the lift on the ground. There's less climb there, so we need even more lift so we can climb more gently. But what I mean by your lift has to match the trajectory of the step is that when you create that lift, if your trajectory is too flat and it's too forward, so if the forward vector, the force pushing you forward is too big and the lift vector is too small, you'll get a very flat trajectory. And if you're too flat, the suspension will be bottomed and it overwhelms and it will bounce you back off the step and then you'll lose traction. If the vector is too high, if you get too much lift, your suspension and your body mass won't actually connect to the face firmly enough, so you actually will leave traction behind. So we want to find that sweet spot where it connects nicely. Now, generally riders don't have a problem with creating too much lift. Lift is the difficult bit. Now, as a trials rider growing up, this was the thing that I couldn't answer for myself. How do we create lift? It is a really important point. It is very difficult to do this, and this is one of the reasons why speed and momentum are actually your enemy. Speed and momentum will cause you a huge amount of grief. One of the biggest things you'll always hear me say is slow things down. The slower we approach, the bigger the lift vector is. So if you come into this rock again, if you come in moving very slowly, the force pushing you forward is very small in relation to whatever lift you can generate. So one way of you getting more lift is simply by slowing down. The faster you approach, the worse it is. And the worst thing about speed is that it's very much in your human nature to want to move forward. We're dopaminergic animals, we're driven to go forward and drive into things. And when you approach an obstacle, what tends to happen is on your approach, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and your heart rate rises with that. So you'll become more anxious on your approach. So when we're training, we're always training to slow things down. Now that's one way of manipulating and adjusting that lift trajectory. The other way is to understand how the lift is generated and start building and improving that vector that's pushing you upwards. Now, like I said, as a young rider, I really struggled to get anyone to explain this to me. I've never had anyone else, as far as I'm aware, I've never heard anyone else explain it in this manner. So, so hopefully this is enlightening for you. Now, when you do know how to lift, to adjust the lift, you can then make adjustments. But not only can you make adjustments, you can also make assessments of what you're doing so you can move forward with it. All right, just check this here. It's all good. Make sure the stream is still working. If you are online and here tonight, please do jump in and say hello. So it's always good to hear. And if you have any questions, by all means, jump in, ask the questions away. I know at the beginning, this is going to be quite a lot to take in. Now, after tonight, I'm going to throw a fair bit at you. It'll take time. If you want to send me a DM, by all means, go for it. Or in the next video, you can jump in and ask your questions there. Now, let's talk about how those 3 different lift mechanisms work. The first one is ride technique. Now, I don't actually have my phone with me tonight, which is hilarious. Jason, do you have your phone? Legend. If you've ever done coaching with me, you'll see this. I've used this example many, many times, and it's a little excessively simple, but it gets the point across. Now, I want you to imagine that you're floating in the space station, and you have this box here floating in front of you. And then I come along and I poke the side of that box with my finger, and the force goes directly through the center of mass. What happens to that box? It just goes straight forward, doesn't it? The force goes straight through the center of mass, it just pushes it forward. If I then poked the object below the center of mass down here, what would happen then? It would actually do 3 things. It would go forward, it would rise, and it would rotate. And the outcome would be a hit, and then that would occur. And if I did the same, if I went above the center of mass, the same would go the opposite way. Now, on the motorbike, we do the same thing. We have a swing arm here, and if I have the swing arm bolted to the box and I apply force to the end of that swing arm, and it goes directly through the center of mass, the box just goes forward. If I take that box and I tilt it like this and I hit down the swing arm, it will go up, forward, and rotate. And that's essentially what's happening on the bike. Now, what I want you to do, I'll grab the Enduro bike. This will be the simplest. Hopefully I'll get it in frame. Whoop. Might want to twist this way, Jace. Now, on your bike, or any bike, I want you to look at it now as 3 separate components. It's not actually one complete bike. There is what I often will call fixed mass. So if I say fixed mass, I also mean the sprung mass. So that's everything that's sitting on top of the springs. So it's all the chassis, the frame, the motor, the top half of the forks, the handlebars, you know, all of that stuff that is bolted together and is fixed together. Now I do say fixed mass and sprung mass because I get sprung and unsprung mass back to front all the time, so I apologise if I do make that error. Now, the back wheel and the swing arm and the bottom half of the rear shock, they move independently of all of this mass. And the same on the front wheel. The front wheel moves independently. Now, when we are trying to create the lift that we're talking about, this is a really big point. We're not trying to lift the wheels off the ground. In reality, we actually want to keep the wheels stuck to the ground as much as possible. What we're actually lifting is the sprung mass plus the rider mass combined. And they are not just a fixed mass, they're moving together. So it gets quite complicated if you think about it a bit too much. It will fry your brains if you go too deeply into it. But for simplicity, I'll tend to always just refer to the actual sprung mass of the bike. So if you think about that, when we apply a force from the back tyre to the chassis, if we get the bike compressed, that line of force will go underneath the centre of mass of the sprung mass, and it will cause some rotation to occur. When you do this, you'll get some lift. Now, I'm not going to go too deeply into it tonight. We'll keep it fairly shallow here, but that is how you generate the lift within ride technique or lift via geometry. We get the bike into that compressed state, And an important point is that within that is not completely compressed. We don't bottom the bike out. We just get it down a little bit. And when it's there, then we give it a very hard, sharp acceleration. And the sharp acceleration is a really important point. That is why pretty much all obstacle riding acceleration is done on the clutch. Things can be done on the throttle, but the throttle's just too slow in comparison. It's got to be a very fast, sharp acceleration so the bike does that, and then it will lift and rise, and then it will push in that on that line of, or the trajectory that you want. So that is lift via geometry. Now the more complicated one is punch technique. So I'll grab my bike. Now, when you watched me do punch technique earlier and demonstrate it, and I said it is lift via stop or containment was the other word that I used. Now, I always refer to it as stop. Now, how much you stop the bike is the key point here. Now, you'll hear me use very specific terminology, and there is a reason behind it. This is one of the biggest ones because everyone tends to put the focus on the acceleration. So you'll hear some people call this double blip, some people call it zap, but the way that we adjust that lift to get more or less is actually by how much we stop the bike, the interaction of the front wheel against the obstacle. So that's why you'll hear me call it that. If I'm in a competition walking a section with other riders, we won't say how much are you going to zap that, we'll all say how much are you going to punch that? And that's what we've always said anyway. Now, when we come in and we place the front wheel against the obstacle, what actually generates the lift is when your front wheel comes in and hits that obstacle and we compress the bike. So the forks are compressed, the rear shock is compressed, generally the front brake is on, and the front wheel is against the obstacle. And I want you to imagine at this moment in time, even though this is quite a small obstacle, the bike is fully compressed at this point. The front's against the obstacle, the bike is fully compressed front and rear, the front brake is on, the rider has pushed down. So I'm on top of the bike and I've pushed down with straight arms and straight legs, and the bike is fully compressed in there. Now, in that moment, there is nowhere for the energy to go because the front wheel's against the obstacle. It can't move forward, the front brake is on, the forks are compressed, so when I go to release the clutch, the forks can't compress, the back wheel can't compress anymore, sorry, rear shock can't compress anymore. There's an effect where your chain tension will pull the back of the bike down, and that can't occur because it's already bottomed out. There is only one direction, one path left for the energy to go. And when you release the clutch, that front sprocket will still want to rotate. And when it does rotate, what it's going to do, I'll just pull my bike back here to show it a bit clearer. What it's going to do is it's going to try and travel around the rear wheel. So the front sprocket will then want to travel around the rear sprocket. The effect is very similar to if you've ever jammed your back wheel in an absolute locked-in spot where you just cannot move the back tyre, but the bike's free to move. If you've ever done that, what happens when you release the clutch? The bike just wants to rotate around the rear tyre. Now, and this is exactly what's happening here. And what happens in that moment is that front sprocket wants to initiate this arc. But of course, the very beginning of that arc is near vertical. It's straight up. So that front sprocket will just get pushed directly upwards. When it does that, a split second later, the front wheel breaks free of the obstacle. And where that force is applied is directly in the center of the bike, and your feet are very, very close to that point. So when that front sprocket pushes upwards, it pushes straight up through your legs. And if you've pushed down into the bike and you have straight legs, it'll push your mass and the bike's mass dead vertical. It just goes straight up. And the key characteristic of this is the bike lifts very level. With ride technique, you remember how the bike went forward, upwards and rotated? There was quite a lot of rotation in that lift, in that mechanism. With this, the bike will lift very, very horizontally. And it's one of the really good characteristics because it allows you to keep the front wheel low and whatnot. So the lift actually comes from the fact that you've contained the bike, you've stopped it against the obstacle, and that gives you that vertical push upwards. This is one of those kind of magical things that when you get it right, it is absolutely, utterly spectacular and it feels amazing. So, cool bananas. The last one, I'll just grab a drink. This live telecast stuff is thirsty work. The last lift mechanism is leverage over the bike. Now, when we are splatting, we use leverage to increase the lift in the bike. And generally what's happened is we'll compress the bike further than what we do in ride technique. So we'll actually bottom the bike out. And that is a reason why you can't actually truly splat on an enduro bike because the suspension is so big and so long. For most riders, some people can, Paul Terres I'm sure could. Most of us can't get the suspension low enough down to effectively get a bottomed out bike. There's still movement left there. So when you go to lever the bike, it gets lost to the suspension dampers. But if you're big enough and heavy enough, you can, and strong enough, you can. Now, we want to get the bike lower and more compressed than we do in ride technique. Once it is compressed, then we're going to lever into the ground and use the leverage just like a bunny hop on the bicycle. Now, leverage is one of the most overlooked concepts within bike setup. And I'm going to explain it just briefly. Do I have a, where'd my piece of timber go? I'll use this here instead. Okay. Now I want you to imagine this steel bar, this steel rod, is a lever going through from my contact patch, through my foot peg to my handlebar. And if I put a pivot in here, so I made this the pivot point, as I lever up, if I grab the lever up here, up at the handlebar, and I pull the lever up, it's pushing the lever down into the ground. If I was to push down on this point as well, the same thing would happen. Now, if I was to take my foot pegs further back, I would increase the leverage. And if I took my handlebars forward, if I rolled them forward, I would also increase the leverage. And that is why you'll see elite level trials riders with their handlebars rolled right forward. It's increasing leverage over the bike. There's a downfall in that because every setup adjustment you make, you're always robbing Peter to pay Paul. You gain in one area, you lose in another. Rolling the bars forward, you will increase your leverage, but you will affect your steering and you generally will lose stability within your steering. The other thing is that, oh sorry, and then on the foot pegs, you'll often hear hard enduro riders especially, most trials bikes are already set up for this, but the pegs will be backing down. And the hard enduro guys will get pegs that are backing down because enduro bikes are built to race and to go that way quickly. If they were built to ride obstacles, they'd look more like this. So we're adapting things, and that's why guys will put those foot pegs on. Now, increasing leverage is good, but when we increase leverage, it means there's a longer throw. So just because you're increasing it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing for you. Don't think that I'm saying more is better. But when we increase the leverage, we'll put more force into the back tyre, but it's a longer action to get the same effect. If we shorten it, it's a shorter action, and it will feel heavier, but you'll get a heavier, shorter throw. You'll get more movement in that length. I've probably just said that back to front, but I'm sure you understand what I'm talking about. So they are the three lift mechanisms. It is geometry of the bike, it is the stop or containment of the energy and only giving it that one path, and then there is leverage over the bike. And the corresponding techniques are ride, punch, and splat. Now it doesn't matter if you've placed your front wheel on the log first and then you ride technique, or whether you ride technique off the ground and let the front wheel touch, it doesn't matter if your front wheel completely clears the obstacle and only the back wheel touches, it's still ride technique. Within ride technique, you can create really good lift via geometry, and sometimes the back tyre will come off the ground. Now that is, you can call it a splat if you'd like, but it's technically not, because you're not generating lift via leverage. When we are punching, when we hit the front wheel against an obstacle, we compress the bike, the energy has nowhere to go, the front sprocket wants to push up, you get this nice vertical lift and very horizontal lift. And then of course with leverage, we are levering in, but we need to get the bike compressed before we can use that. Otherwise we'll lose whatever energy you put in to the dampers. So hopefully all of that makes sense to you. Now, so far, I've only talked, and I know this is all moving very rapidly, there's quite a bit coming at you, but so far I've talked about all of these in their purest sense, so the cleanest, most obvious way. And I said to you before that all of these can explain every version of riding in some way, shape or form, because everything that you do requires lift and it has to be done one of those three ways. Now, I've got a obstacle riding spectrum. So I want you to think about a triangle, and I've got a diagram here. Rather than talk about it, I'll show you. Oh, there's a question there. Jump over to here. What's the question there, Jace?
What's blue and not heavy?
What's blue and not heavy? Oh, I really don't know, some old bike that Tim's riding. So now you put me off, Tim. So getting back to this idea of the three techniques, okay, the three different ways that you can create lift. Now, each of these has its purest form, where you get the maximum lift from that technique, and essentially it's 100% that technique. But what we can do is we can blend the three of them. So we can punch and then use a little less true punch technique and let a little bit of geometry work as well. So we can blend ride and punch technique together. It's very much like you have the three primary colors, and those three primary colors can then be blended and deliver every other color that exists. So I have this little diagram here to give you a bit of a visualization. We have ride technique via geometry, we have punch and the stop, and leverage and splat. And so really you can pick any spot in here. So we could do 50% ride, 50% punch. You might do 30, 60-40, something like that. You can mix and match. And you can actually use all three if you're skillful enough and you know what to do. The reality is though, most riders are using ride technique and punch. This is the side that most people are working on. Splat is very, very difficult to get. These two are the most common one. Ride technique is by far the easiest, then punch is next, and then splat tends to be last. Now, these three techniques, like I just mentioned, ride technique is the easiest. And it's the easiest to learn. It has the biggest windows of time, so you've got opportunity to actually learn. When you're learning, you don't want things to be too tight, too sharp. If the timing windows are very small or the forces are really great, it's very hard for you to time those. So it's much harder for you then to learn. Your brain, anytime you're learning, your brain is looking for data. And if it's too hard or too complex too quickly, it just can't process it. If I gave you a piano and asked you to learn a song and quickly played the song, it's going to be a lot harder for you to learn than if I gradually went through each note. So it's simply that idea. Ride technique is the simplest, it's the cleanest, and it's got the biggest margin for error as well. At the same time, ride technique will really do 80% of every obstacle riding requirement. It's the biggest one that we all use. Now, when you get down the track, when you really build your skill, punch technique becomes incredibly efficient, but ride technique is generally all that's needed. Any trail riders, enduro riders, it is the vast majority of your obstacle riding. It is also how you get unstuck from holes. If you're on a hill, it is essentially ride technique. If you're stuck in a hole or stuck on a log, it's ride technique. It is the vast majority of what you're doing. Punch technique is the next one that you work toward. It requires much finer timing. You've got to be able to lift and place the front wheel extremely accurately. You've got to be able to time that clutch utterly perfectly. And then the last one, of course, is splat technique. Now, splat technique doesn't require the timing, but the thing is, it really requires massive confidence and massive clutch control. If you're in second or third gear, revving the bike to the stop, and then you're trying to lever the bike and you've got to wait for that moment, most people really struggle with that. So that is well down the track. So the most valuable one is ride technique by far. It is often overlooked because everyone wants to do the spectacular stuff, but it is the most important of the lot. Cool bananas. Now, the last thing that I want to throw at you, this is the last thing for tonight. So how long have we been going for? We're 35 minutes in, so I'm pumping along through this one tonight. But don't stress, when you've finished tonight, I want you to go away and let your brain recuperate from everything I've thrown at you. Sometimes it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall. Some of it sticks, some of it doesn't. Come back, watch this again. But we're going to go further and further into these things. Now, all of that stuff, to implement all these things, and when we go into ride technique, punch and splat specifically, we're going to go much deeper. And it's going to get more complex. But I'm going to give you the deep explanation of how and why and whatnot. But then we're going to really simplify it. Because there's no point learning all that if you can't implement it. And we're going to use the brain's most powerful ability, which is pattern recognition. And the awesome thing with all of this is there is one underlying pattern called RSG. It is the most important part of the whole lot. You have to get this first before you can really go and ride obstacles. And that is rev, squat, go. Essentially it is, we're going to ride in approaching nice and slow. We're going to raise the RPM and we're going to control the speed of the bike on the clutch. So that is the rev. And then we're going to squat. We're going to slowly lower on the bike to the position where we're ready to go from. So we're just lowering ourselves to a start point. From that, the last step is go. And go is initiating a stand. So we begin to stand and then a moment later we'll release the clutch. So it's rev, slowly lower down, and then we'll initiate the stand and then release the clutch after that. Because we want to get that suspension just slightly compressed before we release the clutch, we're going to use the leverage, which will increase your traction, and you'll have this perfect little window where you'll have really good grip, you'll have the geometry of the bike set, and then it will generate really good lift. So I'll give you another little demonstration of ride technique with the RSG and slow it down as much as I can, and hopefully you can see it within the technique. So we come in nice and slow, like I said before. We're going to raise the RPM, but not let the bike build speed. That oil is definitely there. Well, that's my excuse anyway. Yeah? So that is all that I want to cover tonight. I don't want to throw too much more at you. If anyone is online and has any questions, by all means jump in and ask away now. I'm more than happy to hang around for a little while. But just to cover back over, there is only 3 lift techniques. If you focus in on those techniques, you'll begin to understand the mechanics. You'll then be able to adjust what you're doing, make assessments of your own riding. You're going to put them in place by learning the RSG technique first, which then, RSG pattern first. That pattern then allows you to learn all those other techniques. It's fantastic for your brain, it loves it. And then the most important thing is you're going to hang around for the next video. jump onto the next video. We're going to be doing another one live on Wednesday night where I'm going to step into a little bit further. We're going to cover some more deeper stuff. And if there's no questions, I'm going to leave the stream there. No worries, guys. Have a great night. If you have any more questions, you're welcome to DM me, and we'll talk soon. Catch you later.